Welcome to Three Count Commentaries. Today we're going to talk about Tale of the Territories from Vice TV. It's episode 2 on Memphis. This episode is 100% about the Jerry Lawler Andy Kaufman feud, which is something I think has been discussed, so much in the wrestling space, but it's still so good to see a documentary on it. Especially one that features a lot of the actual footage. Because some of the footage is stuff I have never seen before. And it gets, usually Jerry Lawler is a part of these things. And he was a part of the actual movie with Jim Carrey and all that kind of stuff. But hearing the story from other people too, like Jimmy Hart. When Jimmy Hart was talking about his, his work with Andy Kaufman, that's something I never heard before. And it came with footage that I had never seen before. So this was a very useful episode. And it was very good. And of course, we learned, and it's something that I felt was very powerful, that we learned that Andy Kaufman kept making these various trips to Memphis to work Memphis TV, even as he was dying of lung cancer. So even as he was sick, he continued to make the Memphis shows. And he also was not cashing the checks for them either. So he was working these shows essentially for free. Now, if you were to look up on Twitter, there's some older wrestling accounts that are tweeting out some things about Andy Kaufman, of course. One of them was Andy Kaufman. I think they showed this in the episode too. I don't remember. But Andy Kaufman was actually at the show where Bruno won the world title from Buddy Rogers. And he talked about Buddy Rogers being his favorite wrestler. And that is what made him a wrestling fan. So he had a origin story that was almost, akin to Edge or a lot of other wrestlers, where they were in the building for something big and sitting in the crowd, they were like, wow, I want to do this. And, he went, of course, in a different direction, going into comedy and everything. But in the back of his mind, he always wanted to do the wrestling thing. And I also don't remember if they told this story in the episode, but I'm pretty sure they did, is that he actually pitched the idea of working in the WWF first, which is his home territory. He's from New York, if I remember correctly. So, because he's pitched it to Vince McMahon Sr., but Vince Sr. was like, new? I'm not doing this with Bruno. You gotta be out of your mind. So, he ended up meeting up with Bill Apter, and it got pitched to Memphis. The original call went to Jerry Jarrett, apparently. Jerry Jarrett then pawned it off on Jerry Lawler. They listened to what Kaufman had to say and then just let him do it. He wanted to wrestle women. They let him do it. He did it 1 week. They figured he had gotten so much heat, they asked him to come back. They let him do it again. Then out of nowhere, the third week, he just wrestled one woman, which is the woman who almost beat him in the second week. And then they decided to do a storyline out of it. Jerry Lawler didn't get involved until like 3 weeks in. So he promised to train the lady, and with the lady with the right training, she could beat Andy Kaufman. From there, we see Kaufman eventually just takes some lumps from this lady, a black lady too, named Foxy. And Foxy ended up losing because she threw everything she had at Andy Kaufman, but she's not trained. She doesn't have the stamina for this. So she survives, just long enough to make it look good before Kaufman eventually pins her and ends the thing. So then the crowd, as Jerry Lawler is telling the crowd, is kind of getting on him because Foxy was supposed to beat him. Foxy was supposed to win. And what I love about this up to this point is that you even got the guys in the back are actually getting work too. They talked about a couple of guys, one of them being Dream Machine, that was actually offended at some of Andy Kaufman's early promos about country folk not knowing anything about soap and being from Memphis, Tennessee. Also, an interesting thing, if you close your eyes and listen to Andy Kaufman talk during one of his promos, he sounds exactly like Kenny Omega. Watch this episode and waiting for them to show a longer Andy Kaufman promo and close your eyes, I'm telling you, you will see Kenny Omega's face in your head. He sounds just like Andy Kaufman. I don't know why that is, but in this episode, I looked away for a couple of seconds. I was like, the speech pattern, the softness of the voice, the hesitation in some of the way he spoke. He sounds just like fucking Kenny Omega. Anyway, to continue the story, him and Lawler, of course, had their match. We know the story from there. But a lot of the B-roll was here. They had a lot of the footage, and the footage is such good shit. And Dutch Mantell says he doesn't know what was real and what wasn't. He, made sure to stay in the dark. He didn't want to know because he was very entertained by the Andy Kaufman stuff. He said he thought that the Kaufman-Lawler feud was the greatest angle he had ever seen. And it's hard to argue against it. It's a fantastic fucking angle. All right, it's a great goddamn angle. For those of you who don't know, maybe you're a little bit younger. What ended up happening is Andy Kaufman ended up saying $5,000 and he'll marry any woman who could beat him. The Foxy thing happens. Foxy loses. Jerry Lawler they get on his case because he was supposed to have trained Foxy, and he's the big bad baby face, and he put his lot behind this girl who lost. So now he's expected to do something about it. So he challenged Andy Kaufman to a match. Andy Kaufman refuses to wrestle men. Of course, he tells the story about, backstage, how he's going to get this match to happen. So apparently they never talked about him and Lawler and Kaufman actually working until they got to the point where he had wrestled all of the women. So this has been about a month and a half in, maybe. After he gets done with the women. They tell stories about Andy Kaufman meditating before every match and how people would have to, couldn't disturb him. He would meditate before and after matches. Jimmy Hart said he would meditate outside of Elvis's home, which is that's great. He was such a huge fan of Elvis, he would autograph the bars, and then in the rain would just wash it away. You autograph them in chalk and something like that, and the rain would just wash it away. But Lawler said basically that Kaufman had no real training, and that essentially what happened is they met up somewhere for him to teach Andy Kaufman how to take a back suplex and take a power driver. Because that's all he was planning to do to him. Not throw punches or anything, but just a back suplex and a power driver. So the night of the match, they had 11,000 people in attendance, which is overfilling the building because the maximum attendance was 10,000 allowed. They talked about how they had people sitting on the stairs, which is, of course, a fire hazard. So they had 11,000 people in the building. Kaufman was doing his Buddy Rogers bit, all the stuff he learned from Buddy Rogers about hesitation and, slicking the hair and everything. Then, of course, they tell the story about, the power driver being an illegal move due to the Tennessee Athletic Commissions. So that was a perfect finish to get out of this match. We have Lawler dealing with the hesitation of Kaufman. He offers him a free headlock. Kaufman hesitates, but takes the free headlock, gets back suplex. And it was a nasty looking back suplex, too. It was a nasty looking move. Then he follows it up with a power driver. Is immediately disqualified, so therefore Kaufman won. And at that point, because he was already down, Lawler gave him another power driver. Now, this is the early 80s or the late 70s. I forget which one. But the power driver is a big move. And therefore, because he took two power drivers, and most guys will be injured after one, he did two. They're going to do a stretcher spot. Now, in the episode, Jerry Lawler talks about how expensive it was to use an ambulance. And the last time they'd used an ambulance, it was $300. So he didn't really want to do an ambulance. But Andy Kaufman, he's a rich Hollywood actor. He's like, I'll pay for it, So they got an ambulance. So he laid there in the ring motionless for 30 minutes while they called the paramedics. And then he stayed in the hospital for 3 days. And all this stuff made local news because Andy Kaufman refuses to break kayfabe. And that's something that is, really pushed hard in this episode that what made it work was Andy Kaufman's refusal to break kayfabe. So they talked about the response a little bit, and I loved this part. This part was really good. Bill Watts, who runs the Mid-South Territory, Louisiana, what is this, Oklahoma, parts of Mississippi. So he calls Jerry Jarrett and tells Jerry Jarrett how proud he is that to be in the same business with Jerry Jarrett and Jerry Lawler, because they took that no good punk who was making fun of their business and they broke his neck. And so he was so proud of them. And Jerry Jarrett was sitting there like, do we tell him? Do we tell him? And even in the episode, he was like, Bill Watts, he thought about saying like, you're a bit of a mark right now. Clearly he's in on it, right? But what made it even funnier is that they showed a clip of Bill Watts talking about it on Mid-South Wrestling. Bill Watts literally went on TV and talked about Andy Kaufman getting his neck broken because it was such a big event, that he decided to address it on his television, which is insane. They worked Bill Watts. That's great. That's some good shit right there, man. That's prime. That's prime rib right there, baby. You get Bill Watts, that's good shit. He should have known it was a work. I mean, come on. He kept coming back. What are you doing? So that was one of the few times, like if you watch Mid-South Wrestling, you'll see Bill Watts, standing in front of he wasn't on the screen when he was ranting and raving about Mean Gene Okerlund. He was actually on commentary or something like that. And that's basically what Bill Watts' thing. If something happened in the wrestling business that was worth discussing, he would discuss it on his show, which is, I don't know why you would do that, but he did. So when the Andy Kaufman thing happened, he talked about it during matches. He did a monologue about it, and it was crazy. Same thing with the whole Gene Okerlund. When Gene Okerlund tag teamed with Hulk Hogan, he was just so offended by that. It pissed him off so much. WrestleMania just had him in a tizzy. But they talked about this, in the episode of Tales from the Territories, how a lot of it was Kaufman doing the heavy lifting, how he refuses to take off the neck brace. He's wearing the neck brace everywhere he goes. And that he wanted to wear the neck brace even if he was latchkey on Taxi. Taxi is a legitimate funny show, though. I don't know how many of you actually watched it, but Taxi is legitimately funny. It's something I used to stay up late to watch because it used to come on 11 o'clock. Right before Cheers, and Cheers was it Cheers? No, it was Taxi, then it was MASH, and MASH was the bedtime, because that's usually when we got, TV static after we got public programming or paid programming after that. But MASH was it. When I heard MASH theme song, it was time to go to bed. But I used to watch Taxi reruns as a kid. It was a legitimately funny show, but he almost got kicked off the show because he refused to take off the neck brace. So he ended up taking the neck brace off just to do the TV show, but he would always walk around with the neck brace on. And because he was in the neck brace all the time, Tony Danza, who was on the show, wanted to come to Memphis to fight Jerry Lawler, legitimately wanted to box him. And Jerry Lawler was talking about, how can I work this? Because we can't tell Tony Danza it's not real, because then he's going to tell other people it's not real. So, like, do we invite him down here and then I fight him legitimately? What to do? But apparently nothing came of it. So no need to even entertain that shit, right? Okay. So, of course, they talked about the Letterman thing, where all of this was Andy Kaufman's idea. The punch was Andy Kaufman, even though it was more of a slap. Kaufman wanted Jerry Lawler to punch him, but Jerry Lawler thought they would just edit it out and that he would get arrested. So he decided he wasn't going to do it. But after they got into a bit of an argument on the couch, Lawler felt like nothing had really happened in the episode. So he added the slap. And from there, it was, of course, a legend grew. They went to commercial for 10 minutes, which is wild if you understand, television. Going to commercial for 5 times as long as, you usually do means something definitely has gone wrong. So apparently those two were separated, and then they were talked into coming back, even though Lawler was still on the grounds. The second part is where Kaufman really goes in, starts cursing and throwing water at Jerry Lawler before running away, and this was noted to be one of the top 100 moments of TV. And Jerry Lawler says that David Letterman truly believes this is the one act that made him a popular nighttime host. And I believe it. So as far as it being a top 100 TV moment, now these things do change over time. So I had to do a little bit of digging in order to find it. But entertainment.com has it late night with David Letterman, Andy Kaufman guests. July 28, 1982. Kaufman's comedy as performance art ethos was on full display as he used Letterman to fuel his feud with wrestler Jerry Lawler. Appearing in a neck brace from a previous bout, Kaufman insulted Lawler, who slapped the comic. Kaufman swore, threw a cup of coffee at Lawler, and stalked off. Nonplussed, Letterman shifted a bit and then muttered, "I'll just be over here." The memorable segment was the first in what would become a Letterman tradition, the public meltdown. "We had no better guest than Andy Kaufman in those days," Letterman said later. "You never knew what he was going to do. Other than that, it was going to be strange and exciting." So it ranked at number 93. So number 93 in top 100 TV moments. But I think the year, well, it was 1982, yeah. So it was approximately a couple of months before, and they talked about this before, WrestleMania. So before Mr. T really got involved with the WWE, Vince was in control of the WWF at the time. At this point, because it's July of 82, he took over in June of 82, but he wasn't the full owner yet. So he hadn't really started his trounce in other territories, anything like that yet. But Jerry Lawler talks a lot about that, So he's pretty proud of the Letterman's thing, which is great, because he should be. It was an excellent piece of business. But of course, most people didn't recognize that he went on beyond that, and that he continued to sort of join the Memphis territory. He became like a regular, and helping him become a regular. They did a spot where he would go out there taped up as Jimmy Hart. Then he would interfere, cost Jerry Lawler that match. Then he would put a bounty on Jerry Lawler's head, $5,000 to anybody who could take Jerry Lawler to the hospital or put Jerry Lawler in the hospital, similar to how he was put in the hospital by Jerry Lawler. So it was him and Jimmy Hart teaming up. Then, of course, they showed some great footage of him outsmarting, pulling an Eddie Guerrero on Jimmy Hart by, the 1, 2, 3, we jump them together, but Kaufman would hang back and let Jimmy Hart go and get beat up. It was great entertainment stuff. Even though, this stuff is 40 years old, it's still very entertaining to see. And they talked about this, the two of them arguing, Jimmy Hart and Andy Kaufman arguing on TV about how they were supposed to work together, but Kaufman didn't want to work with him. And they had like a sissy slap fight between the two of them where 100 punches were thrown and nobody made any contact. But Jimmy Hart said that he was one of the first ones to see Andy Kaufman get kind of sick. And he noticed that he had developed this sort of cough. But they thought that it was the change in weather coming from New York to Memphis again and again, over and over again. They thought he may be okay. Well, the change in weather, going from cold weather to warm weather, was the cause of the problem. But later, he continued to cut promos in Memphis, and then he would cough through them. He sort of lackadaisically would apologize for having lung cancer. Later, he would die in 1984, and he's only 35 years old. Really sad stuff. Jerry Lawler says that, he's been pushing for years for Andy Kaufman to get put into the WWE Hall of Fame. And absolutely he should be. Andy Kaufman was one of the few celebrities of his time that actually took wrestling seriously and played into it. And for them, it's a significant thing that he actually did. Now, there had been celebrities who had done wrestling before, Joe Louis being one of them, Primo Carnero being another one. These two very famous boxers who got too old to box, so they moved into wrestling. But it's for Joe Louis especially, it's a blip. Like, people will barely talk about Joe Louis being a pro wrestler in like 1956. Like, it's not even really a topic of conversation. In the list of things Joe Louis has done, being a pro wrestler on the list is very, very low. But when it comes to Andy Kaufman, because of his dedication, because of the work ethic that he put in, because of his dedication to the craft, and the fact that he was so good at it, it's a significant thing for his career, you know, because it was essentially his second job. He had did it so much, even though he was only involved with it for like 2 or 3 years, but he was made such an impact that, you know, it's a significant thing that he did for the business. And he showed that, you know, even though the idea was there before, there was a German of an idea when, you know, somebody was bringing in a boxer or somebody like that to work in a wrestling context. He changed everything by not only being a non-wrestler, he was a non-fighter, non-combatant of any time, you know, being brought into this situation, you know, to get into fights, and was very good at getting heat. Like, he should definitely be in the WWE Hall of Fame. But I think the most honorable thing, and I think the thing that makes me, you know, admire Kaufman the most, is the fact that he refused to accept any of the paychecks. The family, apparently, Andy Kaufman's family apparently found check stubs from Jerry Jarrett, uncashed. And after he died, they were, you know, he was collecting them apparently. And that's incredible that he was doing all of that stuff in Memphis and just not getting paid for it. And they were making tons of money at the time off of this guy. Like, they was making a shit ton of money off the guy, and he wasn't cashing his checks. Like, that's crazy. That's crazy. But it was a fantastic episode. Highly suggest you watch it. This was actually better than the first episode. You know, the first episode was a collection of stories, you know, some good, some bad, some interesting, some not so interesting. But this was 100% interesting. Even if you know the story already, even if you saw the movie with Jim Carrey, even if you know, went through all of that, this episode is worth watching. This is prime time television. Thank you for your time. Like, share, and subscribe. I'll talk to you guys later. Peace out.